Today we headed to Yellowstone National Park. The drive from West Glacier to West Yellowstone was one of the most beautiful drives that we took on our trip. Yellowstone National Park is centered on the top of Yellowstone caldera. It is the largest supervolcano on the continent, and it is considered an active volcano. But scientists believe an eruption is very unlikely in the next 10,000 years. Yellowstone Park has more than 10,000 geothermal features, including over 300 geysers. Our first stop was at the lower Geyser Basin, and this is where we saw the fountain paint pot and many other geothermal features. It was a beautiful place, and they had boardwalks that you could walk along to stay out of the steamy and scorching water that was bubbling below. After that, we continued traveling south on Grand Loop Road and stopped at Midway Geyser Basin. This is where the Grand Prismatic Spring is located. It is the largest hot spring in Yellowstone and measures 370 feet wide. It is 121 feet deep. It had beautiful colors, and that is one thing that amazed me about Yellowstone, was all of the different colors that are featured in the park. Along the Grand Loop Road, there is also the Biscuit Basin and the Black Sand Basin, but the highlight is the Upper Geyser Basin. It has the highest concentration of geothermal features in the park, and that is where Old Faithful is located. Old Faithful pumps 200 plus degree water out 100 to 185 feet in the air once every 60 to 110 minutes. And we were lucky enough to be there only about 10 minutes before we saw one of its eruptions. They also have a visitor center there, and then the Old Faithful Inn. And that is where we went that evening. We walked around the lobby for a while and then got reservations at their restaurant. We sat down and ate a nice meal. And that concluded our first day at Yellowstone National Park. We spent the night at the Koat Campground in West Yellowstone and got up early in the morning on day 2. We turned north on Grand Loop Road and headed toward Mammoth Hot Springs. We saw a ton of wildlife while we drove through the town. It seemed like the whole town was full of elk. We headed then to Lamar Valley to see more wildlife, and on the way we passed a herd of bison. After taking in the bison for quite some time, we then headed and continued east through the park, and we stopped at Pebble Creek, and then we stopped at Trout Lake, and that is where we got out and went on a hike. Along that hike, we saw some beautiful scenery, and Trout Lake was this crystal clear lake that reflected the mountains that surrounded it. The area is pretty secluded, and it felt like we had the whole place to ourselves. After we walked all the way around Trout Lake, we headed back down the mountain to our RV, and then we headed back toward the town of Mammoth Hot Springs. That is where we stopped and ate lunch. But along the way, we saw some waterfalls, and Yellowstone is full of different waterfalls. Mammoth Hot Springs is a little town that is located inside of Yellowstone, and it has its own post office. There are also some wonderful terraces there. There are the upper and lower terraces, and they have these boardwalks that'll walk you through the numerous geothermal features that just line this area. It was amazing to see, and just the landscape was very rugged. Here is a view of one of the many terraces that get you around this area. It is amazing how each of these geothermal features look so different. After spending a little bit more time at the terraces, we left and headed back south. Along our way, we stopped at a few more places that had geothermal features. And at one of these, we were walking around a loop on a boardwalk to see these features, and then all of a sudden, a herd of bison started walking up and actually blocked the path that we had to walk on. And so we had to turn around and head back the other way. They were just not going to move out of our way. And as you can see, these bison were a little feisty. We then made our way to Canyon Village to see the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. It is a huge canyon that was cut out by the Yellowstone River. The canyon is about 24 miles long and ranges from 800 to 1,200 feet deep. There are two impressive falls in this canyon, the upper and lower, with the lower being the biggest at 309 feet drop. We then left the park and headed back to West Yellowstone for some pizza and shopping, but not before we got caught in a traffic jam. On day 3 at Yellowstone, we headed to Westham Geyser Basin. On the way, we crossed the Continental Divide. Westham Geyser Basin's thermal features extend from the shoreline of Yellowstone Lake. Yellowstone Lake is the largest body of water in the national park. It is the largest freshwater lake that is above 7,000 feet in North America. And in the winter, ice nearly 3 feet thick covers much of the lake. Luckily, we were there on a beautiful sunny day. Westham Geyser Basin is one of the most overlooked areas of the park, and it is one of the least crowded, but it is spectacular and has many geothermal features. Although this area lacks some of the huge geysers that are in other parts of the park, this area is still impressive in its own right. One of the things I found was amazing was the fishing cone. In the old days, before they would confine you to these boardwalks, people would stand out on this cone here and fish in Yellowstone Lake. And after they would catch the fish, they would boil them in the center of this cone where there is very hot boiling water. After finishing up at Westham Geyser Basin, we decided to take a hike. We left the parking lot and then went on the 1.5-mile moderate hike to the lake overlook. And at the top of this summit, we were able to see some amazing views of Yellowstone Lake and Westham. It was pretty impressive, and we stopped at the top to take some pictures. Then we worked our way back down and headed on. We then drove through Lake Village, and then we stopped at the fishing bridge near Hayden Valley. This is an area where grizzly bear can be seen, but we weren't lucky enough to see one on this day. We did see one black bear while we were in the park, but no grizzly bears. While we were there, we stopped and ate lunch. It was a beautiful place to eat, and Hayden Valley was just spectacular. We then continued east, and on our way, we stopped and did the Storm Point hike. This is a hike that takes you by Indian Pond and then along the north shore of Yellowstone Lake. This hike was about 2.5 miles, but it was well worth it for these amazing views. We stopped at several places along this hike to take some pictures with the lake as our backdrop. On our way back to the car, you have to go through a wooded forest area, and it was just amazing to see all the trees that were down throughout this area. After we left the lake, we then headed to our next stop, which was Cody, Wyoming. Today we left Yellowstone and headed to Cody, Wyoming. The drive there was amazing and the scenery just couldn't be beat. When we got to Cody, we stopped at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. It was a beautiful museum and it was part of the Smithsonian. We then drove through town and saw some of the sights. Then that night we went to the Cody Cattle Company for a dinner and a Western show.
I wanna be there when they ride into town. Can't get enough of that great Western sound. It's the best of the West, and along with me to the cowboy jubilee. The cowboy jubilee. A replay of last night's dancing through my mind. And since you didn't know it, I'm a fiddle player too. And if you care to take a dare, well, I'll make a bet with you. Now you play pretty good fiddle, boy. You definitely do. Better fiddle of gold against your shoulder. I think I'm better than you. Boys, my name's Johnny. It might be a sin, but I'll take your bet. You're gonna regret some of it until I've been. Johnny rising up people and play that fiddle hard. There's no more blues in Georgia and the devil deals of cards. If you win, you get the shine, fiddle made of gold. If you lose, devil gets your soul. His case and he said, I'll stop this show. And 5 to his finger twins to 0 and
After the show, we then took some pictures at the Cody Cattle Company and then ventured back into town and did some shopping. Cody is a great cowboy and western town, and in fact it calls itself the rodeo capital of the world. And there is an amateur rodeo every night from June 1st to August 31st. Unfortunately, we were there in September. Maybe we'll catch the rodeo next time.